So today I want to talk about addiction as being a false adventure. And no, I can't take credit for that phrase. I think it's genius and it just really resonated with me recently. And kind of that phrase, my heart, my soul latched onto, and from there it's just spiraled into a couple different journal entries. It spiraled into a written piece, and it spiraled into me wanting to share how and why I think addiction is a false adventure for me. Obviously, I have to give credit to Jordan Peterson since he's the one who talks about this, but it just resonated so much with me, and that's what I want to talk about today. Addiction being a false adventure, and specifically binge eating being a false adventure. It's a false adventure for me, and maybe that's why you too have found this, because it's resonated with you that binge eating, while it's a mechanism to try and fulfill many things, it falsely promises to fulfill many things. I think one of the reasons we use it is to avoid the adventure that truly calls out to us. We just continue to cycle through the adventures of binge eating, at the end of the day not getting anywhere. And it might not be binge eating, right? For other people, this might be doom scrolling. This might be alcohol. This might be drugs. This might be pornography. This might be, I'm trying to think of other addictions. There's so many. This could be running. This could be, I don't know, maybe you have an addiction to drawing. You just can't stop. Whatever it is that holds you back from actually pursuing the thing that calls out to you. Actually pursuing the thing that your heart just longs to do. That is what I want to talk about today. So, what spurred this kind of epiphany was a couple months ago. I was reading through my journal from 2018, and really devastatingly so, I looked at it and I thought, oh my gosh, I am in the exact same position I was in 2018. Okay, not the exact same position, but I am still using food, binge eating, body image, and cycling through that as a mechanism to avoid the thing that actually calls out to me, to avoid doing the thing that I think I'm meant to do. And maybe I'm not meant to do whatever that thing is, but nonetheless, I'm avoiding it. I'm not even trying because I am still having to focus on trying to not binge and trying to recover from binging. So I looked at this journal entry, and I don't know why, I was just flipping through my old journals, and I flipped to that entry and I thought, this is almost verbatim something that I wrote recently. And it was really discouraging, and I thought, maybe let's now finally, as hard as it is, try and break the cycles by actually leaning into the things that scare you, as opposed to leaning into the comfortability of binge eating, leaning into the predictability of binge eating and the safety of binge eating. I'm going to read that journal entry, and then I'll read what I wrote in response to it. Actually, I'll just read what I wrote in response to it. This is from back in June. It says, a minute ago I read a journal entry from 2018. A couple of the entries were as follows. So, back in 2018, this is what I said. The reading today in my devotional was about trusting God. It said, in what ways are you struggling to trust God? My response, my food habits. Then I thought again, my worries of this current and past uncomfortable situation of where am I going? What is my purpose? What am I passionate about? How can I make lots of money? Want the Naval Academy application in? What do I like to do? How can I please myself and others? How to live up to my siblings? Food is just a placeholder. So back in 2018, I was writing that I wrote that I was struggling to trust God in regard to food and body image. And then I dug a little deeper and I realized I'm not struggling to trust God with food and my body image. I'm struggling to trust God with my future. At the time, that's why I say applying to the Naval Academy. I was applying to the Naval Academy at the time, and I was struggling to trust God by just trusting that by continuing to work on it, it would eventually get in. The application would get in. Newsflash, I was not accepted, but the application did get in. I was struggling to realize what I was passionate about. I was struggling to pursue my purpose, etc. And in retrospect, back in 2018, I wrote, it's not food that I'm struggling to trust God with. I'm struggling to trust God with my future. And because of that, I'm turning to food, and it's making it seem as though food is my problem. And so all I can do is focus on food, as opposed to focus on what it is that I'm called to do, as opposed to focusing on what it is that I'm designed to do. And I don't mean to use such religious language. We can kind of extract that out of it too and just say, what is it that you have gifts? What are your gifts? When you do those, when you are pursuing your gifts, when you're drawing, when you're creating, when you're singing, when you're writing, when you're listening to people, when you're giving a presentation, whatever your gifts are, where's your heart at? Do you forget yourself? Do you become less anxious? I think when you are pursuing your gifts, you're just being. When you're pursuing your gifts, you're doing the thing that you are designed to do. And I think, I have to use Christian language here, but the fruits are then born from that. And by focusing on something else, it is just drawing you away from those things. It's drawing you away from essentially gifting yourself and gifting people around you with whatever it is that your gifts will produce. Inspiration, beauty, etc. Instead, we turn to those things that are an adventure. But it's just a cycle. It's just an adventure that ultimately leads to nowhere, because it's an adventure that is rooted in falsity. I'll talk more about that in just a minute, but addiction is an adventure. It's something that calls out to us more in a seductive way. And because it's rooted in a lie, for me, binge eating is all rooted in vanity. It's rooted in a lie. I'll never get to my perfect body image because perfection doesn't exist. So it's just rooted in a lie. So it just leads me like a hamster on a hamster wheel. Versus if I started to turn towards the things that I was called to do, it leads to something. I know it leads to something. I'll show you one thing. I drew those. I can't believe I drew those. I didn't know I even had the capability. Didn't even know. Okay? And yes, there are better artists out there. But when I was not binge eating, when I was sitting at my desk creating that for my sister, I was not focused on food. I was not focused on the things that I'm addicted to. And what's going to come of that is a gift that I'm creating for her. That's the fruit of pursuing a gift that apparently I have. I didn't even know I could do that. And again, no, I'm not Picasso. And no, I did not trace it. I looked at a picture, okay? Just giving myself credit here. But when I was pursuing my gift and not pursuing binge eating, that was then where something was created. And it's so scary. It's so hard. We want to avoid those gifts for whatever reason, right? It's hard to look at the light. It's blinding. I think C.S. Lewis talks about this. I'm totally probably going to misparaphrase, but I'm pretty sure he talks about something about looking at the light just being so blinding. It's so beautiful. You're in the pits of hell. You just binged ate. Maybe you're feeling filthy. You're bloated. God, every cell in your body is just puffy. And I can totally relate to this because just today I binged ate. So I'm right there. I know exactly what the feelings are. I was able to work myself out of it. So I'm not feeling like that right now, but you feel filthy, you feel disgusting, you feel ashamed. And the last thing you want to do is do something that is ultimately nice toward yourself. Do something that's enjoyable. You feel unworthy of joy. You feel unworthy of doing something that you love to do, of creating something. Right? God is love. So when you're in the pits of hell, it is just so easy to stay there. It feels like you have to climb over a mountain to then pursue love. And I think doing something that you love to do is pursuing God, because I believe God is love. So there, when you're creating, you're communing with God because you're doing something you love. I didn't think that this was going to become so Christian language, but I can't help it. I can't help it. Anyway, I went on to say this. Back in 2018, food is a focus for me. I don't just eat it when I am stressed. I have allowed it to capitalize my focus to avoid monumentous parts of my life, not just the minute details. I then even created a list. Food has allowed me to avoid ... worries about my career, future, the overwhelming nature of what I can do, my ability to make friends and connect with people, doing things I love, spending time with people, opportunities for happiness, faith. Food has afforded me the avoidance. That's not a correct way to say that, but because of this focus on binge eating and body image, I have avoided all of these things. I have avoided pursuing friendships. I have avoided thinking about the future, avoided the career thoughts. This is what I was saying back in 2018. And then more recently, I added to this list and I said, food has allowed me to avoid organizing my finances, putting myself out there, pursuing my podcast, writing my blog, pursuing my purpose, planning for college. I want to go back to school, researching different investments, getting out of my comfort zone. Copy and paste. I have had moments where I call a spade a spade. I have had moments in the past where I'm like, Teresa, cut it out. You're using food to avoid the things that you need to do. But here again, and again, I'm writing this more recently, I say I am basking in fear, shame, guilt, laziness, lack of prudence. I have sinned in place of pursuing God. What is a sin? I was listening to Mother Natalia, and she said, St. Gregory the Great says, vice is not in food, but how one partakes of it. But more in accordance with the idea of using food to avoid, quote, when the soul allows itself to enter into passionate movements, it is as all agree outside its nature. Sin is subhuman, not natural. It's part of our fallen nature. St. Maximus the Confessor says, in seeking to obtain pleasure and avoid suffering, man invests many and innumerable forms of corrupting passions. We developed sins to avoid suffering. Passions, self-love, love of pleasure, which is not true love. It's not true love of God. To love God is to actually love oneself. That was kind of a mouthful and a lot of verbiage, but basically what she was saying is, to sin is not to have God up in the sky saying, oh my God, how dare you? I told you not to do that because I said so. He's not doing that. God always has a reason. He's not just saying because I said so. And when I'm binging, he's not up there saying, Teresa, because I said so, put the food down. He's saying, my God, Teresa, because I love you and I don't want you to feel disgusting and shameful, and I don't want you to go down this psychological spiral, please put the food down. What I actually want you to do is I want you to go sit in your room and I want you to go create something, because I've given you the ability to do so. I want you to go sing because I've given you the ability to do so. I want you to go laugh with your friends because I want you to feel joy. I want you to commune with me. And again, God is not like speaking these things, but to kind of break down the Christian language, God is love and God wants us to experience that. There is something within us that wants to be experiencing love. But when we let our passions come into play, when we do something that's out of order, when we binge eat, because we fulfill our flesh and not our soul, it just leads us to not want to go into our room and create, but it leads us to want to go in our room, turn the lights off, get in bed, and just hibernate. And it's depressing. And it leads to a downward spiral. And that is not what God wants for us. He's, again, not up in the sky saying, because I said so. He's saying, sin is when you break from me. Sin is when you break from love. Sin is when you break from perfect order. And when you do that, it leads to chaos. It leads to this downward spiral. It leads to you binge eating, hating your body, wanting to become a recluse, if that's the right word, wanting to hibernate, wanting to self-doubt, having no confidence, having no joy. That is hell. This is what I tell the confirmation students at church, again, to kind of break it down, because for me growing up, the Christian language, I got in this very ideological mindset as opposed to allowing my heart to infuse into the teachings. And again, God's not a man up in the sky saying, don't do this, don't do that. But the way I think about God and sin and hell is, you ever scroll on Instagram? You're just scrolling and you scroll a little bit and it's great. It's great to catch up with people. For me, I am just so captivated by the beautiful colors. I can't not look at all the colors. It's just, I love beautiful pictures. I love aesthetic things. And it's great for a couple minutes. And then you keep going. The first couple of minutes is a rightly ordered pursuit of the creations of this world, a rightly ordered pursuit of enjoyable things that we have in this world. But once you start feeding that dopamine and you just keep clicking and swiping and swiping and swiping, it starts to become unenjoyable. It starts to become an addiction and you can't look away. And now what you're doing is you're sitting in bed and you're stewing, and now you can't stop. And maybe now you pull YouTube up and now you're just getting down to the trap of YouTube. And we've all done it before. And you're just spiraling downward. You're feeding your flesh. The first 5 minutes was feeding your soul because you were connecting with people and you were looking at beautiful pictures that people have posted and videos and beautiful people, and that was great for 5 minutes. That was rightly ordered. That fed your soul. And now you're starting to feed your flesh. The first part was to love God, and then it became wrongly ordered. It was, as St. Maximus would say, passionate movements. Subhuman, not natural. And maybe you continue to do that because you're avoiding your homework. You're avoiding going to sit down and write that paper. Right? As St. Maximus says, sin is to avoid correct suffering, not bad suffering, right? I'm not saying, go walk on hot coals, but to avoid the suffering that will create something. When you go sit down and write your paper, yes, it takes a long time to get into that state of flow. There's that bit of resistance there and it's suffering. But once you start, it's exciting. that you can feel that dopamine. Now you're creating the dopamine as opposed to it just like very quickly being produced by flipping through Instagram, right? This is where God spans across time and space, right? He's infused in science. It's all connected, right? We can talk about sin and communing with God, and we can talk about it from that dopamine level as well. You then go pursue God. You go pursue creativity in your office. You start writing your paper. Now think of that from a scientific perspective. You now go do something hard. The more you do it, the more dopamine starts to kick out, right? And then at the end, you accomplish something, and you've pursued a motivator, and dopamine's kicking out, right? Because dopamine will motivate you, so it's consistently kicking out through that process until you achieve that finish line. You pursue God until you created something. I'm not saying that God is dopamine. Sometimes it's hard to explain what God is, but sin is to avoid correct suffering. And you'll know it's a sin because once you start to get into like minute 35 of scrolling through your phone, you feel disgusting, and it becomes increasingly harder to then get up and go pursue something that's a little bit difficult. It then becomes harder to go pursue God, to go pursue something creative. And it's the same with binge eating. The more you binge eat, the more you fall out from under the protection of God. It becomes easier to binge eat again. Those neuro pathways that connect whatever happens when you're binge eating start to become stronger and stronger and stronger the more you do it. That's like come from a neurological perspective. From a soulful spiritual realm perspective, you fall out from under the protection of God. It becomes harder to then go get up and pursue the things you're meant to pursue. You're stuck in your filth and shame. Your brain is stuck in those pathways. It's an adventure, no less. It's enticing. Binge eating will bring you through ups and downs in the same way that an adventure does, but binge eating, as we said previously, leads nowhere. Because you're pursuing a lie, you're pursuing vanity. And you'll never achieve that perfect body. It will never be good enough. You will be beautiful, but it'll never be enough. So when I recently heard this phrase of addiction being a false adventure, it just really clicked to me because finally I found a succinct way to describe what binge eating has meant to me. And it's been a focus. And I wrote something. It's called Binge Eating is a False Adventure. And we'll finish this podcast off by reading it, and hopefully it's just a good reflection as we head into the new year. What is an adventure, even if it's something small that you can do that will draw your mind away from the obsessive thoughts about food and your body? Something small, anything, and just start there. And it doesn't have to be the new year. I just think it's a good time to reflect on it. I also think that adventure, that small thing, I think it tends to be something that you're gifted with. Maybe you're really good at flipping furniture into something else. Maybe you're really good at cooking, but you just kind of been putting it off. Maybe you're a fantastic baker. Maybe you've always wanted to sew. Or maybe you just have a gift of sewing. and again, I told the confirmation kids this, I like to think about gifts, especially this time of season, since it's the season of gifting. So what have you been gifted with? That's the correct adventure. And it will become, kind of sort of in the words of Jordan Peterson, so interesting that your addiction with food will become so uninteresting that you even forgot you had it. And sure, there'll be moments it'll come back up. I can vouch for that since I binged 8 today. But it'll just become likely less frequent and less frequent. So we'll finish with that. It's not a full final draft, so I'm sorry if some of this comes out bad. I might have to edit live time here. Most of it is a complete draft, but here we go. Binge eating, a false adventure. Take heart, myself, and so many others used to be on that false adventure too. Sometimes I still hop on it. Again, I did earlier today. Anyway, here it goes. Okay, I know it is not that simple. Those of us who binge eat do not only embark on the adventures of binge eating so as to avoid the adventure that truly calls out to us. Binge eating is a faulty mechanism which serves many purposes. By now we all know that a binge of any sort is a misaligned attempt to solve many problems. Cope with unfavorable emotions, release bottled up emotions, turn confusion into certainty, resolve boredom, resolve loneliness, resolve hunger, etc. You get the point. Binge eating falsely promises to accomplish many things. Except hunger. Binge eating rightly promises to fulfill that one, obviously. By now we all know that a binge of any sort, binge eating, binge drinking, binge watching TV, a binge of any sort is a misaligned attempt to solve many problems. Cope with unfavorable emotions, release bottled up emotions, turn confusion into certainty, resolve boredom, resolve loneliness. Oh, I just said this. Resolve hunger, etc. You get the point. Binging falsely promises to accomplish many things, except hunger. Binge eating rightly promises to fulfill that one. Sorry, I just repeated myself. Despite there being many reasons behind binge eating, the many reasons are not what I want to discuss. That is merely a disclaimer. What I want to discuss is when binge eating becomes a detour adventure taken while driving to the trailhead of our heart's desires. What I want to discuss is the times we forego our dream, the unpredictable and scary adventure our heart longs for, and instead choose the predictable, nonetheless scary adventures of binge eating. I want to call binge eating out, expose its seduction, which draws us to take an adventure that leaves our flesh full and our hearts with anything but fulfillment. I want to talk about binge eating as a false adventure. I kind of imagine myself in a car driving to the trailhead of the pursuits that have been placed on my heart, and a siren mermaid with her seductive, provocative beauty stepping out into the middle of the road and pulling me in to the trailhead of binge eating. Completely took me off course from pursuing the trailhead of my heart's desires, of pursuing and beginning the thing that it feels like I'm called to do. Anyway, this proceeds. After hearing Jordan Peterson refer to addiction as a false adventure while in conversation with the Iced Coffee Hour podcast host Graham Stephan and Jack Selby, I had a little aha moment. Finally, I found a succinct way to describe in part what binge eating has meant to me and what I assume it has meant to many others. While interviewing a friend about her own history with disordered eating, I described why I thought I binge ate and what the phenomenon looks like for me. This is what I said. In my head, I am flashing back to the 35,000 lows I've had every time I binge eat. I don't know about you, but does it not just knock you to the floor? Then you gotta spend the next 2 weeks spiraling back up again, only to be knocked back to the floor and spiral back up again? An adventure. Was I not there just describing the ups and downs of an adventure? Is gorging food down one's esophagus not like the downhill part of a hike? When binging, all internal control mechanisms are released as one internally surrenders to a psychological downward spiral, this being similar to the necessity of relaxing your muscles and physically surrendering to gravity while bounding down a mountain. At the lowest points of my disordered eating, I would walk around with a weight of hypervigilance, a weight of anxiety lodged in my chest. This weight held the hypervigilance required to remain within certain caloric parameters and carried intrusive thoughts about food. I go on to list these intrusive thoughts, which would sound something like this. Should I eat that? What did I eat yesterday? Is now the time for protein? 50 plus 50 plus 25. Mirror check. Oh my God, my face is bloated again. Did I have enough fiber? Ooh, but too much fiber means carbs. 50 plus 25 plus 16 plus 120 plus 100 plus 50. Mirror check. Okay, I eat this now. I just can't eat later. 120 plus 60 plus 25. If I eat at 4 o'clock today and not until tomorrow morning, then we can get a good 17-hour fast in. I had a few peanuts, fast broken. Okay, 16 hours then. Oh my God, I had a few other peanuts. Okay, 15-hour fast, 15 hours. 50 plus 70 plus 120 plus 190. Like white noise, these thoughts consistently hummed through the recesses of my brain. The numbers are incessant calorie counting. Sometimes I would just tune these thoughts out, but I could feel the thoughts physically manifest as that weight in my chest. Carrying the weight meant that everything was under control. This, however, was no consolation. Being in control meant sitting in fear that I would lose control. In response to this fear, I would move forth with hypervigilance. It was as if my heart would peer around every corner to ensure the other side wouldn't ignite the weight of hypervigilance in my chest, causing all internal control mechanisms to deactivate, detonating a runaway bomb. Binge. Detonating a runaway binge eating episode, which felt like a nuclear bomb, and my soul ground zero. Despite hypervigilance, inevitably something around the corner would trigger a binge. Uncertainty, fear, or any resistance faced when beginning a new adventure would just multiply the load of anxiety lodged in my chest. As an undergraduate, a new adventure often meant beginning a new assignment. An internal war would settle into my lower abdomen as indicated by a rush of anxiety, hint of rage, and a dash of deep-seated terror as I prepared to begin a new school assignment. At the time, I never stepped back to dictate the anxiety, put into words what was causing the physical manifestation of anxiety. But unable to handle the anxiety in addition to the invasive food and body image thoughts, I instead surrendered to a psychological downward spiral. No more effort, no more trying, no more calorie counting, all internal control mechanisms released as I leaned into the downward gravity of a binge. Computer closed, fridge open, guns of gluttonous self-sabotage ablaze, mouth open, food down. So many times, the pattern repeated so many times. And I'm sure some of you can relate to this. Deep down, I knew what was going on. I knew my binge eating episodes in part was me just avoiding the uncertainty, fear, and turmoil associated with completing a new school assignment. But knowing it deep down did not help. It was not until I was in my senior year of college that I finally got up from my desk, not with the intention of heading into the kitchen, but instead I got up and I asked myself, Teresa, what are you so afraid of? Finally, I took the time and space, literally, I got up from my desk to extract the physical anxiety raging within my stomach, place it up in my head for a bit of workshopping. Here, brain, here is the feeling in my stomach. Please dictate it. Put it into words, spell it out. Was I going to be able to accomplish another assignment? How did I manage to successfully complete all my work in the past? I have an outline for the paper, but you start writing and sometimes you are taken in a different direction. What if I start and can never find the end? Would my abilities to academically perform run dry? If I give this assignment my everything and my everything is not good enough, surely that would confirm my lack of intellectual abilities. I was afraid of failure, plain and simple. I was avoiding the period of resistance Andrew Huberman always talks about when getting into a state of deep work. Once I put it into words, I realized how ridiculous this anxiety was. Might I fail? Yes. Did it matter so long as I was giving it my everything? No. Right? That's when you're told as a little kid, as long as you try your best. While a school assignment might seem silly when talking about the unknown, for me at the time, staring at a blank piece of paper was my unknown. Staring at that white blank document was looking into an abyss of overwhelmingly endless possibilities. My goodness, the combinations of words, sentences, paragraphs, literary references, and quotes are endless. Beyond that, which of the word, sentence, paragraph combinations is best optimal combination? Whatever that combination was, I wanted it, but how would I ever land on it? Paralyzed and overwhelmed by the uncertainty, I defaulted to predictability. Binge eating is the predictable detour adventure taken while driving to the trailhead of an adventure in the form of a school assignment. But here's the thing. It wasn't just the detour I took in the process of completing a school assignment. It is the detour I have been taken while trying to pursue the things that call out to me, the things that give me purpose, the things that are more promising of fulfillment. Instead of pursuing my life's adventure, binge eating sirens out like a little mermaid, its seductive fins snag me off course to the land of safety and predictability. I point back to the discussion that I was having with a friend one time about our struggles with binge eating, and I quote this. I said, also, binge eating, calms me down. It brings me to square one. After I binge, everything is good enough for me. When I am doing okay in life, nothing is good enough for me. But after I binge eat, even small decisions that draw me away from binge eating is good enough. Because it's not binge eating, therefore, it is better than binge eating. I go for a walk and I think, well, this is good enough because I'm not binge eating. I drink water and I'm like, this is good. This is healthy because it is not binge eating. Versus when you are not starting from rock bottom, there is no victory in drinking water. You should just do that. It's no great accomplishment. Post-binge, no longer do I feel obligated to attend to the scary things that I feel called to do. The mission before me post-binge is clear. The task at hand is clear. Landed at the bottom of the mountain, start climbing back up. Start fasting, start drinking water, get good sleep, go to the gym, open the calorie counting app, take the wheel in hand, watch the blood drain from the knuckles, take control as I climb to a better psychological state, and the ultimate promise, climbing to my dream physique. In reality, climbing up that mountain leads nowhere. It is a false adventure. The downhill part of the adventure is ignited by a lie, fear of failure, and propagated by self-violation, gluttony. The upward climb is motivated by a lying North Star. I talked about this before. It's motivated by vanity. Lies lead to chaos. In the Christian language, sins, gluttony, vanity leads to hell. In the loose sense of the word. I'm not using this literally here. That's for another time. We don't need to. The pursuit of vanity has never led to contentment. The only thing awaiting me at the top of the post-binge mountain I climb is the reinstallation of that hyper-vigilant weight of anxiety, and as a consequence of finding myself atop the summit I climbed in pursuit of a lie is the imminent descent, which I will bound down to start again at square one. Meeting me at the top is only that downward spiral. Meeting me at the top, the only way for me to get down off of that mountain is binging. It's a false adventure. It leads nowhere. It's full of emotion, exhilaration, sadness, anger, hope. Nonetheless, it leads nowhere. And it promises a lie. It promises a lie. No one can achieve a perfect body. And what do you hope a perfect body will get you? Recognition, a loving significant other, a good job, contentment. Look around. There are people of all shapes and sizes in their dream job. There are people of all shapes and sizes at peace, working to find peace. There are people of all shapes and sizes hand in hand with the love of their lives. Ladies, good news. Men don't require perfection to turn their head. I know this to be true. I know this to be true because for whatever reason, every time I am walking in the park, I see a specimen of a man. That's the word I'm looking for. A specimen of a man. And a woman who has a beautiful figure, no less, but not the one that in my head I would consider like the perfect physique I imagine to be perfection. And I'm like, he turned his head. I'm not saying she's not beautiful, but doesn't hold that ideal that I believe to be perfect. You know what I mean? It doesn't exist. So I think that thought is a really bad news for binge eating, since it means that seeking perfection for the sake of finding love can no longer be an excuse to not get after your calling. You can no longer not get after your calling for the sake of achieving the perfect body, which we all know will only keep you in the perpetual cycle of binging and restricting. It is a lie. The cycle of binge eating is rooted in a false promise. So the next time you hit rock bottom of the mountain, the next time you're stewing in your own filth, puffy, bloated, ashamed, disassociating from the world, having just gorged thousands of calories down your throat, the next time you're at that rock bottom, the next time you've landed back at that trailhead, you need to get off the trailhead. Find something, anything that is far more interesting than the obsessive thoughts about your body image and food rolling around in your brain. Your gift, whether it's going to draw something, sing something, going for a walk, find your gift. Find something that is far more interesting than your obsessive thoughts about food and your body image. Because once you start pursuing it, your brain is taken up by that interest and curiosity and fulfillment, and there's no more room for thoughts about your food and body. You're doing something creative and you'll be like, oh my God, I just forgot I had this issue. Let me do a little more of that. That was what Jordan Peterson thought as he ultimately discussed alcoholism being a false adventure. As he explained his own parting from alcohol, he stated, "My work became so interesting, I lacked interest in alcoholism altogether." Sorry, I'm not exactly quoting there. I'm paraphrasing. The sentiment was, he really stopped drinking alcohol. And I'm not saying he was a raging alcoholic, but, just maybe had a little too much focus on there. I'm not completely sure of the story, but just had too much focus, had a disordered focus on alcoholism. And once he started pursuing his work, it was so incredibly interesting that he forgot about it altogether. Or he thought, I can't do this anymore because I then can't focus on my work. I can't focus on the thing that really interests me, and I want to focus on it. So the next thing that you go to do that's associated with your gift or that draws you away from thinking about food, it doesn't have to be the scariest thing that calls out to you. Maybe your dream is to become an actress, but don't feel pressured to go to a casting call tomorrow, because when you're puffy post binge and you're all too close to that ringing of self-sabotage that's just like coursing through your veins, you're likely to sabotage pursuing a casting call the day after a binge altogether, leaving yourself even more frustrated. If you're like, you know what, tomorrow I'm going to casting call, and then you don't go, and you already have a little bit of self-sabotage coursing through your veins, you were just going to capitalize on that. You're going to be like, oh my God, not only did you binge, but you didn't even go to the casting call when you said you wanted to go. So maybe just start with a book written by your favorite actor. Let it consume you. Let that book consume you. Let your obsessive thoughts fall to the wayside, and it just might begin a true adventure. It just might draw you away from the trailhead that leads you up and down the mountain of binging, restricting, binging, restricting. One of my favorite psychologists, clinical psychologist, Dr. Julie Smith, maybe you've heard of her, but I think she talks about something similar. She talks about it in the form of grief, though, where there's grief, and she says you're not going to get rid of that grief, but what you do is you start to create more around it, more memories, more friends, more love, and it's still there. And binge eating psychologists talk about something similar. Not that binge eating and grief is similar. Binge eating might be a result of grief, but talks about something similar of saying you're not going to get rid of the issue by just holding the reins and hyper-focusing on the issue. You're going to get rid of the issue by creating a life. Because then your focus will go towards all of those things. I'll finish with this. Dr. Martha Beck says that creativity is the opposite of anxiety. And I believe that to be the truth. If you are creating, if you're pursuing your gifts and creating something, you can't be anxious because God is the creator. Therefore, if you're creating, you're communing with God. And God is love. God is peace. God is not anxiety. So if you're creating, you're doing the opposite of anxiety. You're doing what God called you to do. That's all. Bye.